Hi, my name is Doug Vogt from the Dial Foundation, and it's March 26, 2023. And this is a pretty important video. This puts it all together, and I'll explain. The video is going to have the irrefutable proof that the U.S. government, what they've been doing for the last 65 years. The timeline reveals the truth of what the real danger is. In other words, if you have someone who wants to deny it, or they are scared and they don't want to look at it, they really should look at this. The time period reveals the whole thing of what's doing it. It's culminated in this video by the amendment they made to Senate Bill 4488. You'll see it. What event started all of the U.S. government actions? The reason the DOD and DHS, that's Department of Homeland Security for those in foreign countries, wrote and later amended Senate Bill 4488, what the U.S. government has decided to do. And actually, the amendment reveals that. That'll be towards the end of this video, but it's going to be an eye-opener. There'll be no doubt in anybody's head what's going on, what people may have to do. Okay. The reason why I was able to basically leapfrog many people, many professions, is because of philosophy. The philosophy has to come first. I give the example in one of the earlier videos of a 10,000-piece puzzle. When you buy a puzzle like that, it has a picture. The picture is analogous to the philosophy. So when you pick up one piece of the puzzle, it has a color and a shape, you kind of know where it goes. But if you have the wrong picture, the wrong philosophy, the piece represents a phenomena in our reality. You don't know where that thing fits, do you? The philosophy is everything that matters. This is the second iteration of the philosophy, the theory of multidimensional reality. It was indexed by the Library of Congress and the CIA, Q175, which is philosophy of science, in spite of the name. This is the third iteration, and it's the second edition of theory of multidimensional reality. I've upped it and added some stuff to it, some important things, like why the universe was really created, and also who and how the science, our current science, was destroyed. This is a copy of the amendment of that bill, and I have, if you send me an email at info@dieholfoundation.com, I will send you the bill and the amendment. It's pretty interesting reading. Anyway, this is when they were copyrighted, 2007. I predate everybody. And this is what their addendum is, and you'll see it in the timeline. I first thought this was going to be a simple task, this video, just basically going through the amendments that they did. Then I started thinking about it and going through the amendment, and also did a list of the agencies they listed, the ones they added, which were very revealing, and the ones they left out. And once I did that, I realized they basically accepted my premise and my philosophy and my findings in video series 4. It was pretty obvious, and you'll see it for yourself. Regarding telling your children or grandchildren, I've debated it, and people have written to me and said that they try to tell their relatives, but either they don't want to believe it or they don't want to listen to it at all. They don't want to know. Because the behavior of our son, which I'll show on the next slide, events are catching up with us. We will have no choice but to tell at least our close relatives that they should be forewarned. Certainly the children, regardless of what their age is, because they have to know that when they go to school, they should really pay attention. They should be the best they possibly can. And they should pick majors or professions that build things or make things. In other words, the world is not going to need, or the survivors are not going to need, more lawyers and social and psych majors, art history majors. You know what I mean, the liberal science stuff. We're talking basically hard sciences. You want professions that make things and do things and know how to build things, which means also the trades, because that's what governments will wind up choosing. That'll be survivors in these cave systems. So that's the reason why it's important you wind up telling your children, get serious. And I say here in the video on this text, anybody over 16 years old should be mature enough to at least listen to understand what's happening. In fact, there's an excellent chance if you have children that are somewhat disturbed, or they're bothered, they're sad or morose, it may be because subconsciously they know something bad is going to happen. Many people have written it in not just my videos as comments, but also in others, I've been told, and I've seen them, that they know something is going to happen. They just don't know what. This is basically what happens, what's described in video series 4. Last, I'll warn you all, whoever sees my videos and have commented, you're going to go through the 5 stages of grief. There's 5 because one of the psychologists had named them, and I'll accept her list. Basically, it's denial, which a lot of people are into. They don't want to hear it, forget it. But you do. This is an event you have to face. Depression and sadness, then bargaining and fear or anxiety. I get people say, well, maybe it's this, maybe it'll just wobble, maybe this and that and the other thing. Now, they're saying it out of ignorance because they don't know all the events that happened during the last polar reversal. And then finally, acceptance, and then you're going to get angry. And the reason you're going to get angry is you're going to know how badly man has been deceived and lied to. I say in my volume 4, it's like swimming through an ocean of lies. And that's really what we're at right now. That's why I did video series 12, part 1 and 2. Part 1 explains who, the Calpurnius Pisos, destroyed our science that we have today using the tool Aristotle, which they stole the name, and they added most of the material. Now, why did they do it? That's in part 2 of video series 12. That'll give you an education. It's going to be a shocker for some of you, but it's time you know the truth. Now, the reason why Senate Bill 4488 is so important is this. One of the reasons. March 12th, our sun gave off a tremendous CME, a very fast one. These screenshots, this is from NASA. And what's interesting, this is their notice on their website. While researchers are still gathering data to determine the source eruption, they don't want to tell you this thing was an X40 or above. This looks like it may have been like a Carrington event, which was an X45. That's where the Earth is. So you take a circle like this. This thing went to here to there about, I think about 17 or 18 hours later. That's what I estimated the dust show when the nova happens will get to us. But also, if anyone wants to download my videos, especially if there's going to be a Carrington event, you're not going to have electricity in the northern latitudes, at least for a while until DHS gets their act together and replaces the transformers. That's why I want the bill passed as soon as possible. You have to write to your senator and congressman on those committees. Anyway, join YouTube Premium. It's only like $13 or $14 a month. Do it for 2 months and download the videos. I can't send it to you on a CD or DVD. It doesn't fit. Some of them are 1.5 to 3.5 gigabytes, these videos. So it's just easier and faster if you just download them through YouTube. This is produced by NASA. Look how fast this thing went in one direction. Here's the Earth. We're on the other side of it. So we didn't see this thing, but they picked it up by the satellites. This thing came as fast as a Nova show would hit, which is pretty scary. I'll bet anything this was an X-45 and above, and they didn't want to say because they don't want to scare people. And I don't blame them. I mean, I don't want to cause public panic, but I need enough people to know it to put pressure on the politicians to get these two bills out of the House and the Senate committees. Okay, the best way to irrefutably prove what the U.S. government's been doing is you follow their actions. Now, I mentioned, oh, by the way, what I'll have in blue type here, a longer version of when I previously filmed, and I go into some of this stuff earlier. But I'm just going to briefly do this thing so I can get to the later stuff, which is more important. The first thing to figure out a great secret is what event in time in history caused another group or country to react to it. That event was this, the Gleisberg cycle, and for 1 month in December was from 300 to 355 sunspots over a 5-day period. You'll see it in a second. I have it on the next screen. It was December 21st to December 26th, 1957. June 29, 1958, Eisenhower passed the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Act. The purpose of the reason, yes, we did go to the moon. There's a mirror up there. You could flick a laser off it. And the Russians have actually told me in an interview that, yes, they did it. So the Americans were, in fact, on the moon. Anything else is disinformation to put doubt in your head. The reason why we had to go to the moon is we wanted an environment that there was no wind and no rain. So they could pick up the samples and see what the samples told them. And unfortunately it did. September 12, 1962, President Kennedy announced we're going to put a man on the moon before the year 1970. It's unfortunate he did not live long enough to see the event happen. By sheer coincidence, George Bush Sr. was in Dallas at the time Kennedy got assassinated. What a coincidence. By the way, he was later the head of the CIA. I don't know if there's a connection, but anyway. July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 lands on the moon, thanks to Kennedy. And the U.S. government spending a lot of money. June 24, 69, Apollo 11 returns to Earth with the moon samples. You'll see them in a second. September 16th, 1969, about 2 months later, the astronauts news conference. I showed it in that video. You can watch it. You can download it also and watch it on YouTube. They all three looked like they were at a funeral, and two of them were honored enough to stand on the moon, but they looked like they were in a funeral. I'm told that two of them became alcoholics, one became a recluse, and that's probably the reason why. They were told the truth of why they went and what they found, and don't tell them you were walking on glass. September 26th, just 10 days later, Thomas Gold, he was a physicist, astronomer, wonderful man. I've read most of his journal articles. Science articles saying that a nova could have caused the glazing. Actually was also in a NASA briefing and report. And shortly thereafter, his Science Journal article, which I showed in the other video, they canceled his contract. I guess he wasn't supposed to say that Gee, a near nova could have caused all this. Anyway, now we get to what government does. October 28th, the next month, Nixon writes Executive Order 11,490, and he assigns assigning emergency preparedness functions to federal departments and agencies. And you can understand why. By connecting the dates, you know why he did it. They didn't know when this sun was going to nova. They knew it did nova now, for sure. They knew that was the heat source that creates the ice age. It isn't the cold. That comes later. And anyway, so what they did is had an executive order, which stood for a while. Had a couple of more executive orders. Nixon and Ford had another one also. All the same stuff. I have Nixon's executive order. If you want to read it, I'll send it to you. This is what happened on the sun in December. This is highlight 316 up to 355 sunspots in a couple of days, over a week. This is what the Germans had outlined of what they saw. This is December 23rd, where there were 343 sunspots. I love this stamp. One of my fans had sent me a whole sheet of them. I already had a plate block of it. I used to be a stamp collector. That's how I learned geography. Anyway, they did this stamp at about April or May, and then they passed the NASA bill in July. Now, keep in mind, it takes months for a bill to be written, composed, and then go through committee, but they did this one fast. Now you know why. This is what a Gleisberg cycle looks like, and this thing happened on that Gleisberg cycle. There it is. This is it. 57, 58, and then supposedly it was supposed to calm down. It didn't really calm down the sun, the one after that, like it did here. Anyway, that's what it is. Now, this is the samples they brought back. This is from the journals at the time, and these are the glass beads. This is from Apollo 11. This is Apollo 15. Another sample. That's why they landed in different locations on the moon. They wanted to see if it was homogeneous or what this thing looked like when the dust shell hit it. This is fission tracks. This isn't fission track from the glass beads. They did find fission tracks on the glass beads. They looked for them. This is, I think, on a piece of mica. But the glass beads had, anybody who tells you, oh, it's from volcanic eruptions on the moon or impact craters, they're lying. They're part of either ignorance or disinformation. They had at least 5 different radioactive elements they found on these things. It could only have been formed in a relativistic temperatures. We're talking the millions of degrees, 30, 40 million degrees. The other one, fission tracks. You don't see that from impacts or volcanoes. So anyone says that, you then know how stupid they truly are, or they're lying to you. September 16th. This is our brave 3 astronauts. One guy was up in the orbiter, but the other 2 were on the moon, and they looked like they were at a funeral. And that's the problem. And everybody who sees it says the same thing. They must have been told they couldn't tell about the glazing on the. It's like this: when the sun first novaed, it baked and melted the surface of the moon. Then when the dust shell hits, it laid down a layer of these glass beads. I don't know how thick the glass beads were, but you can see it. I think Ben Davidson, on his Suspicious Observers, he actually had the video of the astronauts saying they're walking on glass and everything is all, maybe go see that video. There may be others on YouTube, but it gives you an idea. They did know, and that's probably what they told the astronauts. Do not tell, this is the reason why we sent you. October 28th, the emergency prepared thing. But what Nixon did, instead of giving this to NOAA, NASA, and USGS, because it's really a science problem, you don't know the whole mechanism, then you don't give it to an intelligence agency to keep it a secret. And they were in charge also, to a great extent, to the National Science Foundation. So anybody who wants to wind up researching, did the sun nova, they're not getting grants. And the colleges and universities only care about the money. That's it. So that's why they require all the professors publish or perish. It means get the grant money and give us money into the college so I can have a big fat salary or something like that. But the way National Science Foundation grants are issued, the scientist who does the work can only get 1 month's salary. But the administrators are going to take half of it. Isn't that lovely? It's a scam. This happened, Reagan administration, his very first month in office. And he sat down with his cabinet, including William Casey, the director of the CIA. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. Now, the belief is really that the sun is the thing that's causing global warming. And you'll see a few examples of the disinformation, the prominent ones. Here's the first one. This was interesting. This is by Charles Hapgood. Now, he taught in 3 or 4 Ivy League schools, basically history. His PhD was on the French Revolution, but he never finished it because war interfered, I think, or something, or the Depression did. Anyway, so who was this guy? And how come Albert Einstein, spoke to him? In fact, I have all the quotes from his book and where he mentions Einstein. He's trying to stick Einstein in the book. Einstein died in, I think it was April 1954. His book was copyrighted in 59. And Einstein died 5 or 6 years sooner. So I doubt seriously that any schlub or writer is going to get to Einstein and talk to him. But you'll understand who he really is. This is Hapgood's bio. World War II, Hapgood was employed by Office of the Coordinator of Information, COI, which became later Office of Strategic Services, OSS, in 42, and it eventually became the CIA. And also served as a liaison officer. So we know he was in the Army as an officer, probably high-ranking, maybe colonel or above, between the White House and the Office of Secretary of War. That was the former name of the Department of Defense. So he's a liaison between President Roosevelt and the War Department. He's not a nobody, he's a somebody. And they knew him, and he had security clearance and everything like that. His background is world and American history, anthropology, economics, history of science. The reason why they gave him the job of figuring this thing out is because they had to. Before NASA brought the samples back, they had to have an idea of what they're dealing with. So what did they have? They had legends, mythologies, some religions, and some geological evidence around the world. He didn't do such a hot job there, but he did this thing, this been copyrighted in 59. The agency, the same year, there was an act, the Central Intelligence Agency of Act of 59. They were actually created in 1957. I'm sorry, 47. But anyway, this gave it away. He was doing this for the CIA. This is a CIA document where it winds up saying the poles are going to shift and stuff like that. I somewhat forgive them because they didn't know, they didn't have a lot of the data from the deep sea canyons from the Alvin, the voyages of the Alvin, nor the magnetic mapping of the mid-Atlantic ridge, which would have told them right off the bat, it's North, South Pole, and that's it. But they didn't know. Someone forgive him. Him I don't forgive at all. Chen Thomas. He had two different books. Both, by the way, were never copyrighted by the Copyright Office. And the reason is he was an employee of the CIA. And his job was, again, like Hapgood's, to figure out more. Anyway, there's two versions. The first version, he says, edition 1, 63, and a third edition in 65. That's most, and it was 55 pages. That's most likely the internal reports they did. The way we know there's an internal report, this is declassified in June 24th, 2013, and declassified by the CIA. They thought so little of his work, it was declassified with a menu, a shopping list, and another news report which had nothing to do with this. That's how little they thought of it. The 1993 version, which is, by the way, 15 years after my first book, 127 pages. That doesn't include the part that says aftermath to the Adam and Eve story. That's even more pages, additional pages. And I will have a video where I'll go through the whole thing. But what's interesting, when he did the book, you know, if you're an employee of the CIA, everything you publish you have to submit to them, and they decide if you're going to publish it or not, or what's going to get it redacted. Well, nobody bothered. This is in his dedication page. You got that? Now, the first page of dedication is to his wife. Lovely. The second is to this, but was not in the 1963 or 65 editions. In the 93, he did put this: to General Hal Grant and his wonderful family. To General, that's Curtis LeMay, and Admiral Taylor. There's several Taylors. I had to figure out which one it was. I did. To the Joint Chiefs of Staff of that time for their inspiring encouragement, without which this book might not exist. Meaning, he's telling you here, he had face-to-face contact with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which should tell you right off the bat, he's in the agency and they have a project to basically deceive man or keep this thing a tremendous secret so no one knows that our sun novas. Now, next I'm going to go through this. I went through these guys, who they are. Tell you the time period for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Grant retired in November of 64, died in 1989. General Curtis LeMay retired in 65. So this is all happening about the time he's writing his first drafts in 63. Died 1990. Admiral Rufus Lackland Taylor Jr. This one gave it away. Retired in 69. Actually, about 6 months before the samples came back from the moon. Died in September 78. He was an officer in the U.S. Navy. Eventually, he became director of Office of Naval Intelligence. I actually had a contract with them and sold them a document imaging system in the Pentagon. Had the rank of Vice Admiral. In 1966, he was appointed Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. That's the one I wrote to and gave me an answer back. And then shortly thereafter, as Deputy Director of the CIA, where he served from 66 to 69. Now, there should be no doubt in anybody's head that what Chen Thomas did was write a document that winds up being CIA disinformation to lead people away from the idea of where to go and that the sun nova. In both their books, they're implying that the new North Pole is going to be South America, and the new South Pole is going to be here. Actually, they screwed it up. It would have been, this is going to read the South Pole, this is going to read as the North Pole. But they don't know they didn't think this thing out too good. Anyway, and you'll see later why they're telling people don't go to South America and Brazil. You'll understand why, because that's where they're planning on going. This is the other disinformation program. I know for a fact they paid Wallace Browker from Lamont Doherty, he was a geologist, to write this journal article. This is in the journal Science, August 1975, volume 89, page 460. In other words, this is intended to blame mankind for global warming because we're burning too many fossil fuels and CO2. He's the father of the global warming stuff. He's the one, nobody else. There weren't any other journal articles doing that. In fact, 2 or 3 years later, I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, I think it was in this one, and it's mentioned in God's Judgment book, a scientist wrote a journal article saying there was over 1,000 journal articles showing the Sun-Earth connection regarding weather. This guy is blaming CO2 on global warming only on CO2 and man-made stuff. Again, it's to deceive you, to make you look someplace else and not that big orb in the sky. Now to continuing the dates. May 15, 78. That was the first printing of my first book, Reality Revealed, The Theory of Multidimensional Reality. I have it on CD. I haven't decided to reprint it or not, maybe because of money. And it's like 450 plus pages. Printing costs really have gone up. Anyway, you can get the CD, which is a PDF, a searchable PDF. It's $15. You can get it on, if you go on to dieholefoundation.com or vectorpub.com. It's there, you could order it there, and I mail it off to you. Okay, on May 10th, 1979, I wrote a letter to Luis Alvarez, Dr. Luis Alvarez. He was a PhD in physics, a Nobel Prize winner. He did work for what they call the Jason Group. And I explained it in the previous link, the previous one I showed. And that's top secret stuff. The people who watch it are the Defense Department, basically, and the intelligence community. That's all. Shortly thereafter, about 3 or 4 months later, I mentioned this before. First, I got a call from Fort Lewis to come down there for a stupid reason. I didn't come. I told them what to do instead. They didn't like that, so a guy from the CIA called me up from Fort Lewis, and we had a nice talk. They wanted to know, one, quote, how did I figure it all out? See, they didn't know the stuff I came up with. And I told them the research I did and what I had to do to figure it out. This is a copy of the letter I wrote to Luis Alvarez. It's on carbon copy stuff, so you're going to see, if you want to get a copy of it, send a request to info@dieholefoundation.com, and I'll send you the PDF of the 2-page letter. And you'll see how much I knew, like 45 years ago. I knew way more than they did. They had never put all the pieces together. And I didn't put all of it together until I did the research and did the book, God's Judgment. That's all there in chapter 8. Anyway, if you get a copy, you'll see strike-throughs because this is a carbon copy for those who only knew about computers. In the old days, we used to have to have a carbon copy, copy paper, and then if you made a mistake, you had these whiteout things we put in there, and you type over the one you don't want, and you type in then the new one. It was strike over tape. And so you'll see some of it in the letter. but you'll see the letter and what it covers, so you know I'm not lying to you. This is the truth. Okay. Reagan had canceled Nixon's Executive Order 11,490, and he incorporated much of it into this Stafford Disaster Relief Bill. And this is the bill. I'm only going to highlight the things that are important for the discussion, but this is the legal basis for them to spend the money to build these shelters. That's the importance of it. Now, the bill was also amended, and you'll see the amendments, and try not to laugh your head out too much. Definitions, definition of other catastrophe in any part of the United States, substantial damage or injury to the civilian property or person. That's the definition of a catastrophe. Number 4, measure taken into preparation for anticipated hazards. The construction or preparation of shelters, shelter areas, and control areas, stuff like that. That's the legal basis for them to spend $21+ trillion on doing this. Now, I'm not saying they were wrong in doing it. I'm saying what happened is because they didn't understand the total mechanism of what happens during a polar reversal, they wasted the $21+ trillion they spent on it because they built them in the wrong place. They didn't realize they're going to have a bad ice age where they built this stuff with thousands of feet of glacial ice and snow over them. They couldn't get out. They'll run out of oxygen before they run out of toilet paper. This is some of the amendments. Transfer or reassignment of existing functions from Defense Civilian Preparedness Agency, Department of Defense, transfer and assign Secretary of Homeland Security. That was created only later under Bush. This is the amendments. 102. Now, keep in mind, they're transferring a bunch of things to Secretary of Homeland Security, DHS. All functions vested in the President that have been delegated, blah, 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 Federal Disaster Assistance Administration, FEMA. That was created until later from Reagan. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is where they shoved a lot of the costs for building those DUMs. And are transferred or assigned to the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is important to remember to figure out why the bureaucracy, including his own Attorney General, turned against Trump and didn't help, including investigating the election of 2020. Including these functions, redelegated, blah, 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 severe weather-related emergencies. Yeah, I'd call a polar reversal on a nova definitely that, or a Carrington event. These are two other, and they're important changes. To the extent authorized by law and within available resources, the Secretary of Defense shall provide the Secretary of Homeland Security, again, that department is important, with support for civil defense programs in the areas of program development, that was research and study, administration, technical support, the DARPA experiments, research communications, transportation, intelligence, emergency operations. 206, all executive agencies shall cooperate and assist the Secretary of Homeland Security in the performance of his functions. That tells you that all the agencies are supposed to support them. I don't know if it also included spending money for what their goal was. Okay. Now, what I did was I compared Nixon's executive order, which was included in that Stafford bill, Obama's executive orders, 13575. You can read all this online. You can search all the executive orders. And Trump's executive orders. Now, the point of what I'm showing you here, and I've covered this before in this video, but notice the ones he didn't include. Now, I'll explain. Obama created this one not to do anything for rural America. No, no. It was so all these agencies can sit down, talk, and coordinate the spending on these deep military bunkers that they built and how to supply them. They had to cover the spending somehow so nobody would know it. Trump promoting agriculture and rural prosperity in America. That was the title of the executive order. What's important about this one, and what's missing here, is it told me they never told Trump about a Carrington event or what this was all about. They never did. Maybe because Obama was been briefed or was already corrupt enough that they can blackmail him to shut him up. I don't know. But anyway, look at what he pulled out. Department of Housing and Urban Development is missing. Gee, how do you like that? Department of Treasury, missing. Well, you got to spend a lot of money. You don't want Office of Management Budget to go find it. You don't want them showing up. I mean, you got to have them on your team and shut up. Then finally, Department of Homeland Security. You saw the bills. They were funneling all the responsibility to DHS. And here Trump doesn't include them, which means they couldn't meet and really do the planning they were supposed to be doing to save their own rear ends. So they all turned against Trump. Now, the Attorney General is also listed in this cavalcade of, Department of Justice. He's included here, but that means the previous Department of Justice Attorney General had to have known about some of this stuff, but they never told Trump. That's the reason why they turned against him, and they still are, including the media basically is bought and paid for. But you got the idea. This is what's going on. March 14th, 2018. This is when I had my first videos. And by coincidence, it was the day that Stephen Hawking died. I did not plan it that way. It just worked out that way. Anyway, September 7th, 2018, about 6 months later, DARPA announced a multi-year investment of $2+ billion in a program called AI Next. There's their logo. But good job on the logo. These are two videos you can watch in greater detail. But the point being is that what happened is I think they decided to develop an AI program that would put all the journals and other material, books that had certain Library of Congress numbers. That's why they re-indexed my Reality Revealed to Q175 in April 4th, 1994 to Philosophy of Science. And that's why a lot of my stuff was indexed Philosophy of Science or quantum computing, is because they put it all in a database. And I mean all the journals, including all the geology ones, astrophysics, and they wanted to see if the AI program would come up with the same program, the same answer that I did, which you'll see in a second. November 9th, 2018, started video series 4 on the Ice Age and polar reversal, which I'm still doing, as you could tell. And its purpose is to explain everything, giving the scientific reasons and evidence for it, almost duplicating what was in the book, but the book has even more. Anyway, August 15, 2019, DARPA, first DARPA Subterranean Challenge and Tunnel Circuit. That told me immediately that they knew they built these domes in the wrong place. They knew there was going to be an ice field above it. Because if you watch these videos, This says basically what they wanted was companies or universities to come up with a fully autonomous robot that would go through a mine cave, and they even had some of the dummies laying down, propped up, some heated, some not heated. It had to recognize words on a wall and objects. And know that it had to have some kind of an AI program. But when you start heating dummies up, and some are not heated up, it tells everybody immediately that they want to see who's dead or alive inside that cave. When you imply a fully autonomous robot, it means you can't get a living human being in there to report back, because they know they can't get to the front door because there's thousands of feet of ice and snow blocking it. And it's not like you can dig a tunnel into the ice moves. It moves slowly, but you dig a hole in one end and 1,000 feet down, that hole is moved. Anyway, August 13th, 2020, I sent my registered letter to 3 individuals in the Department of Defense. One of them obviously is the intelligence group, Defense Intelligence Agency. And I got an answer back, as I've told everybody, in September 7th, the next month, in 2020, I got an answer back. And I go through it in one of these videos. Anyway, didn't hear back from them for about 2 years until this Senate bill showed up, 4488. When that came, and the number of times it mentioned catastrophic and the threat of human extinction, existential, they define in the bill as the threat of human extinction, you know immediately they had read my stuff. What it means is their AI program, after they got everything into it and they had the program written, they ran the thing, especially after I wrote them the letter, and lo and behold, their AI program came up with the same thing I did, including probably where to go, and it must have also said, yeah, you can't build it here in the United States because you're going to have an ice age and you won't be able to get out. I don't think it came up with the drop dead date like I did, because I found that in the Torah, and I'm not too sure it really connected the Gleinsberg cycle. I'll assume it did. So let's just say it knew it was between September and December 2046. The Torah gives an exact date of October 16, 2046. You could find how I found that in Moses 10 Code System. I think it was part 2 or part 3. I show where I found it, or how I found it. Okay, so the Senate bill was June 23rd, 2022. The month later, July 28th, they introduced the House bill. It's 8574. You can get these online. If you write to me, I have them, I'll send it to you as a PDF. August 15th, 2020, DARPA, Ice Control for Cold Environments, Ice Broad Agency Announcement. Again, I can send you that. People have asked me for it, and I sent it. It was in the previous video, part 5J. That told me immediately, again confirming, they knew they had to deal with an ice age globally, and they want to be able to somehow protect the troops, the people, as well as the equipment. And I don't know if they're going to try to alter the DNA on food plants so they can survive it. I hope they don't do that, because then if they alter DNA on plants, you may not have food any longer, at least not from that, all of a sudden tomatoes are poisonous, We don't want to do that. October 22nd of 2020, I wrote a letter to DHS and FEMA. The heads of, Mayorkas, the head of DHS, And there's a nice lady who's the head of FEMA. Wrote to both of them, and I think it was just, how did I send it? It wasn't registered. I think it was just regular or priority mail. But I didn't get an answer from them at all, except they got it, I think, a few days later. December 12th, they had amendments. DHS and DOD made amendments to the bill, adding 6 new departments to the bill. Their amendments told me what they were going to do, what they decided. It also told me this, that my suspicion was, since this was such a great secret, I'm sure Defense Intelligence Agency knew it, and I knew some people in the CIA knew it. Probably nobody else. The contractors I know that did the work on the DUMBs were only told about a Carrington event. They were not told about the big one, the reversal. So, and I'm going to go through the brief description of what I sent to Mayorkas and the lady. And you'll understand why all of a sudden they wound up doing an amendment. I'll bet anything, though, when a Mayorkas or whoever opened that letter, read it, wound up calling up, I mentioned Defense Intelligence Agency, somebody there, if not the Lieutenant General was in charge of it, and said, we got a letter from a Douglas Vogt saying he's the one who was one of the reasons this bill was written, and about a second disaster. And I think at that point, they probably said, we can't talk on the phone. This is going to have to be a face-to-face meeting. And I think that's what happened. In other words, I think the heads of most of the agencies were never told about the polar reversal and the cataclysm at the Sun Novas. They wouldn't, because the more people know about it, the less chance of keeping it a secret. So that goes for bureaucrats no matter how high they are, because they all have families and they know when this thing's going to happen in 23 years. Let's say the politicians 20 years from now are not going to remember any promises that these guys were made by other politicians. Instead, it's going to be whoever's in office at the time decides who gets saved and who doesn't. So promises made now is like, it doesn't mean anything. Anyway, on February 27th, I wrote to all the congressmen and senators on those 2 committees. I've offered to send my mailing list to anybody. It's an Excel sheet. If you want to write letters to your congressmen and senators, it is very important that you do it. The bill, catastrophic 36 times, global catastrophic 19, existential 17, and in the bill it defines what it means by existential. It's one short sentence: the threat of human extinction. So anybody who's in fantasy and La La Land, well, you probably haven't watched this much of the video anyway. You probably have a very short attention span anyway, thanks to television. But this should wake you up. It does everybody who has an IQ of at least 110. Existential risk 11 times. Human extinction, actually say it twice. So, and these are some of the videos you could watch that cover some of the information that's covered in that bill. This is part of the letter, the top part, that I sent to Secretary Mayorkas. As you can see, I give him a warning, this is considered classified. Because I didn't know how much they actually told this guy, even though all those bills I showed earlier, they all focus and funnel into the Department of Homeland Security. But obviously they didn't tell him about this one. Anyway, a brief description. I tell him who did the research or who I am, and I did research for 47 years. I tell him how the bill came about and who I contacted, one of the agencies. people in the Defense Department I contacted. The likely danger of a Carrington event and what they could do to help prevent the worst part of a Carrington event hitting the northern latitudes. Explaining the second disaster the bill is intended to prepare for, the polar reversal, nova, and ice age. That's a brief description of what I said in there. Now you understand why less than 30 days later they had amendments to that bill. Now, I'm going to go through a total of 33 agencies. I'm going to do this fast. This is the executive orders. O is for Obama, T is for Trump, N is for Nixon. This is the Stafford bill, and this is the Bush bill. Now, Bush bill was after 9/11, so they included some things because they wanted to find people in terrorist groups and domestically and overseas. So it's not a true bill designed to do this thing regarding the cataclysm and polar reversal or Carrington event. It's just kind of overlaps. Anyway, I'll go to the ones that make some sense. Director of National Intelligence, Homeland Security, DHS. Shows up Nixon, Obama, but not Trump. Never includes them. Secretary of State, only Nixon listed it. Stafford did, maybe copying Nixon's. This only because they knew it had to do with foreign countries. But it's not listed in this current bill. Oh, sorry, it is listed in this bill, but not in Obama's and Trump's. Undersecretary of State of Arms Control and International Security. I don't know why they included them. Either they're in charge of the portable nuclear power plants they have. I don't know. The Attorney General, to make sure no one gets thrown into jail for spending money that they shouldn't be spending on. Director of Federal Bureau of Investigation. You know, I'm surprised they still haven't contacted me to say hello. One of my original letters in 2020 was in fact to the head of the FBI. Never got an answer. In fact, he was the last one to pick up the letter and that was a registered letter. Secretary of Energy, everybody mentions them. It's in this bill too. Undersecretary of Energy for Nuclear Security, they're interesting. Nobody mentions it, but it's in this bill. Interesting. Secretary of Health and Human Services, it's there. Everybody mentions them. Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response. Secretary of Commerce. Yeah, Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, NOAA. Now, like I said earlier, Nixon should have given it to NOAA, NASA, and USGS. And in this bill, which shows you they are listening to me, they listed NOAA and USGS. No one before ever listed USGS. They did in this one. Because it's really a science issue now. I'll bet anything, USGS is going to be sending geologists down to South America. Environmental Protection Agency, I have no idea why. They're just a bunch of lawyers like suing people and putting people out of business. Assistant Administrator of Water, that was added. That was the only addition that EPA or Homeland Security actually added. I don't know why. Administrator of National, NASA. Nixon listed them, Obama and Trump did not. I guess because they already had the evidence. They figured, what do we need them for? Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Secretary of Treasury, okay. Secretary of Defense, they all wound up mentioning him. But they added these, Assistant Secretary of the Army of Civil Works. I didn't heard of them, they added that one. I had to look it up. It's in the Department of Defense. Water Resources, Commercial Navigation, Restoration, Protection, Management of Aquatic Ecosystems. Well, after the flood, you can have that issue. Flood Risk Management, boy, the ultimate flood risk. Engineering and Technical Services, that's probably one of the main reasons. Commanding General of the Army Corps of Engineers, added. Chief Engineers of the Army Corps of Engineers. They didn't just want the boss, they wanted the head of the engineers to come and give them technical information, what could be done, what can't be done. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, only understandable. That was added. Never, the other bills never mentioned him by name. Administration of the U.S. Agency for International Development. This is a funny one. This gave it away, and also them listing, let me show you, Secretary of State, this one, told you that they knew they had a deal now with foreign countries. So, anyway, these were very telling. This one, very telling. These also, basically these are Corps of Engineers stuff, like they're going to be doing the building. They've decided to take this thing in-house, and you'll see it in a second. Okay, this is the AID program. USAID is officially a component of the U.S. foreign policy. USAID operates subject to the President, Secretary of State, and the National Security Council. This is what's in the National Security Council. Try not to laugh too hard. USAID has missions over 100 countries, primarily in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East and Eastern Europe. How much you want to bet they're going to cut down on how much they do for Asia, Africa? Let the Europeans deal with Africa. Latin America, yes, but a lot of South America, I think. The Middle East, they'll probably cut out. And Eastern Europe, they'll leave it up to the Europeans. Yes, the Security Council, all the security agencies of the federal government structure. Secretary of Defense, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Director of Central Intelligence Agency, Administration of USAID, the boss of this thing. Secretary of Homeland Security, he shows up again. Director of National Intelligence, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Treasury, you're going to spend a lot of money. Attorney General, so no one gets thrown into jail. Ambassador to the UN, that's called Let's Make a Deal. Anyway, the other ones are kind of throwaways. A bunch of other political hacks that are in there, but they're political throwaways. Okay, this is also very telling, and you'll understand why. This kind of gives it away. I had to compare all the bills with the bill with what else was out there. And lo and behold, it's what they don't list that also gives it away. Department of Agriculture. Gee, you think you're going to save hundreds of thousands or millions of people, they're going to need food. You have to coordinate it with Department of Agriculture, wouldn't you? No, they're not listed at all. Why? This is why. The Trump administration, in DUMS, that's what it means, they found food and drink hidden by they call it the cabal. They shouldn't. It's just the bureaucracy for consumption that could feed the whole world for the next 150 years. 14.2 billion tons of high quality food. This is the funny part. They had been analyzed. The samples did not contain toxic substances that are normally released in the general public, like titanium dioxide and sodium aluminum phosphate. If you see any baked goods that have sodium aluminum phosphate, do not eat it. That will give you dementia or Alzheimer's. And the other one, titanium dioxide, that's in a lot of things, including toothpaste. That does give you colon cancer. So that's what they found. This poor photo, this is the best I could find. And it looks like someone took this picture covertly because there's some kind of a stand that was moving here, or a cart, and it kind of blurred out. Anyway, let me continue. Department of Labor, gee, you think you're going to be building stuff or doing things in the United States, you're going to have to make sure you have a labor force, besides all the illegal aliens coming over and the drug dealers, but they don't have the Department of Labor at all. Why? Because the labor they got have uniforms on and already been paid by the US government. Department of Education. They're actually the cause of some of this problem. When you institutionalize stupidity and keep teaching stuff that many people know are false and wrong, so you can sell a degree and get a lot of poor young people indebted for the part of their life, they shouldn't be included in anything. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Again, they're not planning on taking the money out of HUD. Gee, how do you like that? Why? Because it has to be, these things have to be built overseas, not here. Therefore, you can't hide it. You can't have spending, let's say in Brazil, and have it come out of HUD. You just can't. It'll stick out like a sore thumb. Department of Transportation, gee, you'd think you'd have to move transformers and wire and telephone poles or whatever they have to during a Carrington event? Hell no. Why? Because the one who's going to be doing the transportation out of the country is Department of Defense. Department of Transportation. Again, they show up in the Stafford bill and the DHS bill, not here at all. Why? Because the DOD is doing all of that. Communications, same thing there. Small Business Administration, irrelevant. Office of Management and Budget, not listed. Why? That told me immediately they're planning on burying this expense among those 33 organizations or departments in the federal government. That's what they're doing. Often a national drug control policy, forgotten. I think my opinion is they want the American people doped up, drugged up, drunk, and dead as soon as possible, so they have as the Army officer who wrote to me, a more nimble working force they can manage better. The other two are just political throwaways anyway, so I don't care about them. So that's the transportation system. Oh, by the way, this is kind of funny. These are all military-aged people, guys. I assume there's some girls someplace in there. They're all wearing uniforms. And you know, when I buy an airplane ticket, you know, I have to go through customs or, you know, get checked, and usually it says like Alaska Airlines or United or you know, one of the others. This plane says, it's a C-5A, it says United States Air Force on it, which gives you an idea, they're taking this thing strictly in-house. This is where they're going to be doing the building. That's my guess. Exactly what I said in my previous videos I listed earlier. This is Tropic of Capricorn. This is like about 16 degrees here, but these mountain ranges here. What's interesting, this is an old map. You don't want to build anything along here. These Andes look like this because there's another plate here, multiple plates here. And when this Earth stops its rotation, it's going to go that way, forces this way. That's what causes this. But the Pacific Ocean, by the way, I did a measurement, it's like 9,000 miles of ocean. Now, the whole thing isn't going to go this way. Maybe 4,000 or 5,000 miles of it. Depends how long the Earth's rotation stops. But here's your natural drainage areas for it. So you don't want to build anything in this area, but where the hills and mountains are, you got enough here. You can do it. In Central America, Mexico, this is, right here is the Tropic of Cancer. The tip of Cuba across here. So the only thing I worry about is it's going to be a lot of water rushing over this thing. That doesn't mean you should be scared of that. If the reason why the foundation is involved in trying to find an engineering company to develop the door system to be able to take that water pressure, the flood is only going to be lasting for a couple of days when this body of water rushes this way. But with the slosh back from the Atlantic and the Pacific, it'll keep sloshing back until it stabilizes. It may be a whole week, maybe a little bit longer, but once you pass that and you haven't been flooded out, it's going to be okay. You survive it. Then you only have to worry about the torrential hot rains, then the snow, and then you guessed it. I mean, that's basically what you have to get past. But like I showed in the previous part 5J, the tropical plants in this area did not have to wind up evolving to deal with freezing cold climates for a long period of time. My plants are coming up from the roots. Like I mentioned earlier in that video, everything that was above ground died. They withered away. But the root was not affected because the ground did not freeze long enough. So the plant came up from the roots. Excuse me. The ice will kill you. You can get past the nova in a cave system. You get past the flood, the Great Flood. You can't get past this. If you're in northern latitudes, like for instance, Colorado had 11 or 13 glaciers. It still has 3 or 4 now. It wouldn't look like this. I think those mountains were totally covered with ice and snow. You wouldn't see anything. It'd be more like here down. Appalachia would be definitely covered totally in snow and ice until it starts melting. Give it a couple of hundred years though. Anyway, let's say you can even get out of your cave and you're 3,000 or 4,000 feet down there someplace. There's Denver. But you'll see a wall of glacial ice and it moves. You're not getting out of it. You're going to run out of oxygen before you, like I said, before you run out of toilet paper and food. This is what kills you. Even if you got out, you had a small cave on the top of a peak and it wasn't covered. Number one, you can't build a cave on top of a peak or something like this. You can't get the equipment up there to actually drill it and dynamite it and do it. Keep that in mind. But if you got out, this is what you'd see. Where are you going to get food? There's no animals anymore. They're gone. They're dead and down there. That's the end of it. This probably shocked you, but this is the evidence. It's irrefutable now. The government is flat out telling you what their decision is. It's exactly what I said in my books and my videos. They are listening to me, and I don't think anybody else, and their AI program. They wouldn't have submitted this Senate bill unless their AI program said the same thing I did. And their actions speak louder than anything else, than words. You always look at the government's actions, nothing else. And as you can see what they've done and what they've decided, this is what it is. Now, I don't criticize them for making the decision because they're doing the right thing. The problem is they're not going to be able to keep this thing a secret. Not many people watch my stuff anyway. And the American's attention span is that of a sand flea or a gnat. If it's 5 minutes, I'd be lucky. To watch mine that run half hour to an hour and 10 or 15 minutes, let's face it, I give a college course on this on YouTube. And you know, it's only going to be people who have an attention span and have an IQ over 110 to 120 that watch my stuff. But you have to understand, this is not a joke. If you're watching this because a relative said you have to watch this, you now know the truth. You now know what the government has been doing for the past 65 years, what they've been hiding and what they've been doing in the background. It's like a shell game, smoke and mirrors. So that's what you have to face. So you're going to go through the 5 stages of grief. When you get to the point of you're as mad as hell and you want to do something about it, then let me know.